Have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt invisible, while someone with a famous last name drank your credit like it was a cocktail? Have you ever been laughed at under a spotlight and wondered who would step forward if you fell? What would you do if the very place you saved nearly collapsed and nobody so much as said your name? If those questions make your chest tighten, then stay with me, because now I am going to tell you my story. And I am asking you to listen to these confidences the way you would lean in to hear a truth that might change how you see power, pride, and the work we do when no one is watching. This is sweet and sharp. This is a memory that tastes like salt on the lips and iron in the mouth. And I promise you, by the end you will be asking different questions about courage. My name is Lena Marquez. I am 39 years old, born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and for the past 11 years, I have worked as a senior compliance analyst for Carter & Wells. On the night everything shifted, I was standing in the center of the company's annual investor soiree, dressed in the same black dress I wear to every required event, because no one there ever notices me long enough to remember what I wore the year before. The ballroom was all chandeliers and polished marble floors, but even with all that shine, I felt myself dimming around the edges. To everyone swirling around the room with their champagne flutes and curated laughter, I was not Lena with a decade of expertise. I was simply that woman from compliance, a background fixture, a human version of office wallpaper. As I stood near the back wall watching the event unfold, I could see Elias Carter glide through the crowd like some kind of corporate royalty. At 34, and with a last name that unlocked every door in the company, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who never had to earn anything. Investors clapped him on the shoulder, executives leaned in as if his every word was gospel, and he accepted every compliment for stabilizing the company's finances as though he had personally rebuilt the foundations himself. Meanwhile, the truth was that my quiet investigations had prevented 2 major federal penalties that could have drowned the company in fines. Yet all night long, the speeches rolled out one after another, each one carefully scripted to highlight leadership excellence, innovative vision, and family legacy. My name did not appear on a single slide, not even in the microscopic footnotes. There was not one acknowledgement, not one nod, not even the courtesy of a passing mention. The erasure was so complete it felt intentional. As the applause echoed around the room, I felt something cold settle in my chest, the kind of cold that comes from realizing you are present, breathing, working, sacrificing, yet somehow invisible. And in that moment, surrounded by glittering gowns and polished lies, I felt myself disappear in real time. I was still standing near the back of the ballroom, letting the noise of applause fade into a dull ache in my ears, when the spotlight suddenly shifted away from the stage and cut straight across the room. For a second I thought it was a lighting mistake, until I heard the too familiar sound of Elias Carter's voice, warm with whiskey and dripping with that inherited arrogance he wore like designer cologne. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with theatrical flair, "allow me to offer tonight's most thrilling bonus attraction." The crowd chuckled politely, not because they cared, but because they were conditioned to laugh when a Carter spoke. I felt my stomach tighten before I even understood what he was doing. The beam of light stopped directly on me, bleaching my face and freezing my breath in my throat. Elias lifted his glass toward me and said, "Here she is, our compliance encyclopedia. Let us start the bidding for the woman who can quote regulations faster than she can make friends." People shifted uncomfortably, exchanging small, strangled laughs meant to hide their secondhand embarrassment. I stood rooted to the floor, my pulse thrumming in my ears, my humiliation delivered like a party punchline. No one corrected him. No one intervened. Nobody bid. The silence stretched so painfully long that even the air felt ashamed of itself. For a moment I could not decide what burned more, the humiliation or the realization that this room full of professionals genuinely believed this was acceptable. My hands shook, but my face did not. I forced myself to look around the room, searching for any sign of humanity, and that was when I saw him, a man in a charcoal gray suit, leaning against the far wall, watching me with a calm, unreadable expression. His posture did not shift. His eyes did not flicker away. I did not know his name yet, but later I would learn it was Jordan Hale, and this moment was the exact second he decided my invisibility was worth paying attention to. The spotlight faded at last, and the room awkwardly snapped back into its rhythm, but my body was still rigid from the humiliation. I slipped away from the crowd, trying to breathe past the tightness in my chest, when the unmistakable click of fast heels approached behind me. Before I could escape, Monica Reyes, our human resources director, intercepted me with the polished smile she used whenever she was about to blame someone for their own mistreatment. "Lena, do you have a second?" she asked, though it was not a question. She touched my arm lightly, pretending concern, while her eyes stayed sharp enough to cut glass. "You looked upset out there." Elias was only joking. "You know how these events are. It is important we all support a positive company culture." A positive company culture. The phrase landed like a bruise. She was not checking on me. She was managing me. She wanted compliance, not resolution. And she wanted it quietly. "You are a valued member of the team," she continued, "but you need to relax a little. These events are supposed to be fun. Do not let it get to you." I watched her lips move, but all I heard was the subtle message beneath it. Accept the disrespect. Do not make a scene. Protect the brand. Protect the Carter name. The humiliation was bad enough, but the gaslighting was worse, because it tried to rewrite reality before I had even processed it myself. I nodded, because nodding was safer than confronting the truth in her words. As soon as she released me, I walked past the ballroom doors and into the nearest hallway where the music softened and the performance of corporate unity faded. My hands were trembling now, not from embarrassment, but from clarity. I stepped into a bathroom stall, locked it, and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed against the dim light as my fingers steadied. I typed 3 words to the encrypted contact I had kept hidden for over a year. "We are live." Then I pressed send, feeling the first warm pulse of purpose return to my body. The message had barely left my phone before a wave of memory swept over me, sharp and familiar, pulling me back to the moment this entire quiet rebellion began. It was almost 20 months earlier, long before the gala humiliation, long before I knew the name Jordan Hale. Back then, I was just a tired analyst working late nights in the compliance office, trying to keep Carter and Wells from tripping over its own arrogance. One evening, while reviewing a backlog of financial controls, I stumbled across a pattern so subtle that anyone else would have dismissed it as clerical noise, but something in the numbers felt off. The same vendor codes appeared in irregular cycles, the same approvals rubber-stamped too quickly, and the same upper management signatures appearing with suspicious timing. Most employees would have flagged it and moved on. I could not. I dug deeper, tracing the threads through months of documents until the truth formed a shape. It was not clerical noise. It was a systemic breach that could have triggered a federal investigation and cost the company $20 million in penalties. I knew exactly who would try to bury it if I reported it. I also knew my career would evaporate the moment I exposed a Carter-era failure without protection. The weight of that knowledge pressed on me like a closing fist. That was when a name resurfaced from an old industry article I had read years earlier, about a private investor who specialized in acquiring troubled companies and rebuilding them from the ground up. Jordan Hale. I hesitated for hours before sending the encrypted file to the anonymous inbox linked to his firm. Within 2 days, I received a short message back from him. "You saw what others ignored. I will be watching." No praise. No theatrics. Just a quiet acknowledgement of my work and a promise of attention. That single message became the beginning of an alliance neither of us would fully understand until the night of the gala. 2 days after the gala incident, when the building still buzzed with awkward gossip no one dared speak directly to me, I received a discreet message from an unknown number. It contained only an address and a time, nothing more. I recognized the pattern from our past encrypted exchanges, and I knew immediately that Jordan Hale was calling in our unspoken agreement. After work, I took a rideshare across the city to a quiet hotel perched above downtown, a place so polished and understated that it catered to people who wanted power without spectacle. I stepped into the rooftop lounge and found Jordan seated near the glass railing, the city lights reflecting off his suit like scattered silver. He did not stand when I approached. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying me with an expression that carried no pity, only calculation and something I had not felt from anyone at Carter & Wells in years: respect. "Your message said we are live," he began, his voice steady and unhurried. "I take it something changed." I sat across from him, my palms still warm from the humiliation I was carrying like an echo. I told him, in a calm voice I barely recognized, exactly what Elias Carter had done and how the room had watched in silence. Jordan listened without interrupting, without inserting commentary, without softening the weight of the truth. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "I have been increasing my stake in Carter & Wells quietly for the past 6 months," he said. "I am in position to move. But the question is not whether I can take control. The question is what you want me to do with it." His eyes locked onto mine, steady and unblinking. "Lena, do you want the company to be owned or corrected?" The choice felt like a door I had never been allowed to touch, suddenly placed in my hands. For the first time in my career, someone with real authority was asking me what I wanted, not what I would tolerate, and I knew my answer before I even spoke it. "I want justice," I said. Jordan nodded once, as if that single word completed a plan already in motion. After that rooftop meeting, something inside me shifted, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a quiet, grounded certainty. I returned to work at Carter & Wells the next morning with a calmness that felt almost unnatural, like stepping into a battle wearing armor no one else could see. For weeks, investors had been asking careful questions about spending patterns, missing justifications, and event budgets that made no logical sense. Elias brushed it off as creative branding expenses, but even the board had begun to look uneasy. He finally cornered me in the hallway one afternoon, his voice low and frantic, asking if I could help him tidy up some files before the next investor briefing. Of course I agreed. I nodded with the same neutral expression he always mistook for obedience. I followed him to his office, listened to his rambling excuses, and wrote down every detail he spilled in his panic. The moment I walked out of his door, my role shifted from invisible analyst to silent architect. I began documenting every questionable transaction, cross-checking signatures, and mapping the full timeline of fraudulent reimbursements he had approved. Every expense that did not align with policy was cataloged. Every forged justification was preserved. Every electronic edit he attempted triggered an internal marker I embedded into the financial system, ensuring that nothing could be erased without leaving a digital shadow. I sent blind copies of key communications to Jordan's legal team, using the quiet channels we had established months earlier. They did not reply, but I did not need them to. Their silence was confirmation. Each day, the evidence grew thicker, heavier, more undeniable, forming a rope Elias did not realize he was weaving around himself. And the more desperate he became, the more careless he grew, handing me every tool I needed. The company had taught me to be thorough, to be precise, to never mow. Rumors travel through corporate hallways the same way cold air slips under a door, quiet but unmistakable. Within a week, whispers of an upcoming external audit drifted through Carter & Wells like a warning bell everyone pretended not to hear. I noticed the way conversation stopped when I walked by, the sudden hush in conference rooms, the nervous glances from managers who had once ignored me entirely, and as predictable as clockwork, HR called me in for a quick discussion, which was never quick and never a discussion. I walked into Monica Reyes's office to find her already sitting at her desk, hands folded neatly, expression polished into corporate neutrality. Lena, she began, with a sigh heavy enough to imply disappointment. We need to talk about your attitude lately. She said attitude the same way someone might say contamination. I sat across from her, steady, silent. She continued, there have been concerns that you are becoming resistant to feedback, difficult to collaborate with. We need employees who support the company culture, especially right now. Right now. The phrase was not an accident. She was not addressing my behavior. She was warning me. They could feel something shifting, and they wanted to get ahead of it by making me the problem before the truth surfaced. I listened calmly, hands resting in my lap, heart steady as a metronome. When she paused, expecting an apology or a softened expression, I instead reached into my pocket, lifted my phone, and stopped the audio recording I'd been running since the moment I entered her office. The soft click echoed louder than her entire speech. Monica's eyes widened, just briefly. Before she tried to recover her composure, I stood and placed the phone in my bag. Thank you for your clarity, I said, my voice even. This will be very useful. And then I walked out, leaving her in stunned stillness. Jordan received the file 10 minutes later, and his only response was a single line. Good, keep going. Heads turned sharply. Elias froze mid-smirk. And there, stepping forward with deliberate precision, was Jordan Hale, his expression steady and unreal. The announcement of the second fundraising gala arrived in my inbox with the usual forced enthusiasm, promising a night of elegance, celebration, and company unity. I already knew it would be. Another spectacle centered around the Carter family. But this time, I walked into that ballroom with a calm I had never felt before. The lights were brighter, the decorations more extravagant, and the guest list seemed even more curated for appearance rather than purpose. I took my place near the back again, not hiding, but watching. I had learned that visibility was a choice, and tonight I chose to observe without shrinking. As predicted, Elias Carter drank too quickly and spoke too loudly, basking in the shallow praise of people who supported him only as long as his last name held value. At some point in the evening, he stepped onto the small stage, microphone in hand, flushed with confidence he had not earned. The crowd turned toward him, expecting the usual empty jokes and self-congratulatory comments. Instead, he swept his arm across the room and said, Ladies and gentlemen, it seems our favorite compliance encyclopedia has joined us again tonight. The spotlight snapped toward me, that same blinding wash of white light that had humiliated me once before, but something was different this time. I did not flinch, Elias grinned, encouraged by the attention. Shall we try again? He asked, smirking. Who wants to start the bidding for Lena? The room fell silent, but it was not the same awkward quiet from the first gala. This silence felt taut, expectant, like the brief stillness before a storm breaks open. And then, from the far edge of the room, a calm voice cut through the silence with perfect clarity. $1 million. Dable, as if he had been waiting for this precise moment to reveal himself. His presence shifted the entire room, and for the first time, Elias looked truly afraid. For a long moment, the ballroom stood frozen in disbelief, as if time itself had paused to process what Jordan Hale had just said. Elias's smirk collapsed into something pale and shaky, and the microphone slipped in his hand with a faint squeal of feedback. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering urgently, their confusion spreading like ripples across a still pond. Jordan did not look at them. He looked only at Elias, calm and unbothered, the way you study someone who has already lost a game they do not know they were playing. Then he stepped onto the stage as if he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. Elias tried to speak, but Jordan gently took the microphone from his hand, the gesture so effortless and controlled that the audience quieted instantly. I appreciate the warm welcome, Jordan said, his voice steady, almost conversational, but carrying enough authority to silence every whisper. but I'm not here to bid on anyone. His gaze swept across the room, pausing briefly on me before continuing. I am here to make an announcement that will affect everyone in this company. The lights shifted, focusing on him as though even the building recognized the shift in power. As of this afternoon, I have finalized the acquisition of additional shares, he continued, which makes me the new majority shareholder of Carter & Wells. A collective gasp broke across the room. Executives stared in disbelief. Board members exchanged frantic looks. And standing near the front, President Graham Carter's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as if he had been punched in the chest. Jordan did not soften the blow. For years, this company has relied on the illusion of leadership, he said, his tone sharpening. But real stability comes from competence, integrity, and accountability, qualities that have been ignored by those who believed their last name was a shield. The silence was crushing now, every eye glued to him. Then he delivered the line that ended the Carter legacy in one clean stroke. There is only one reason I invested in this company, Jordan said, his voice lowering, and it has nothing to do with the family running it. It is because of one person who has held this place together quietly, precisely, and without recognition. His eyes met mine fully. Lena Marquez, and the room erupted. When Jordan spoke my name in that room full of people who had spent years pretending not to see me, the sound was so unexpected that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Conversations erupted instantly, a chaotic wave of disbelief rolling through the ballroom. Executives whispered in frantic huddles, board members checked their phones as though reality needed confirmation, and investors leaned forward with sudden fascination. I stood perfectly still, not out of shock, but out of something deeper, something steadier. It felt like the ground beneath my feet had finally stopped shifting after years of instability. I was no longer invisible. I had become undeniable. Security escorted Elias and President Graham Carter off the stage as the board scrambled to gather themselves, but their panic barely registered with me. Jordan stepped down, offering me a simple nod, not a dramatic gesture, just an acknowledgement that the moment we had built toward had finally arrived. The gala dissolved into a confused, buzzing crowd, but by morning, confusion had transformed into action. An emergency board meeting convened before sunrise, with attorneys, auditors, and newly empowered voices filling the room that once catered to the Carter family's every whim. The findings were swift and unforgiving. Elias was suspended indefinitely for extensive misuse of company funds, fraudulent reimbursements, and repeated violations of financial policy. Graham Carter was forced to relinquish operational control, his influence reduced to ceremonial involvement with no real authority. HR scrambled to adjust their tone, their posture, their alliances, but it was too late for them to rewrite their roles in the culture they had protected. And when the board voted, it was unanimous. I was appointed Executive Compliance Advisor, reporting directly to Jordan Hale. As I walked out of the conference room, past the same people who once dismissed me as background noise, I felt no anger, no triumph, just clarity. My steps echoed through the hallway like a quiet reclaiming of space that had never belonged to the Carters in the first place. It had belonged to the truth, and now, finally, so did I. So what do we owe the quiet people who keep things from falling apart? And what do they owe themselves in return? If this story made you feel seen, angry, or quietly hopeful, tell me which moment hit you hardest in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more, subscribe so we can keep pulling back the curtain together. Think about one small step you could take this week to right a wrong, name an unseen worker, or record the truth you cannot afford to lose. If you try it, come back and tell me what happened. This is not just my revenge story. It is a drawing lesson in dignity, a blueprint for quiet courage, and an invitation to build a world where people like us are noticed before we have to make a storm.